Hey, what's up, family? Welcome to episode 6 of The Conversation, season 2. You made it through season 1. Now you are closing out with us season 2. And we're going to be talking about a powerful verse today. This whole time we've been going through the parables of Jesus. And during a time like this, knowing how Jesus would handle the situation, knowing how we should handle the situation is going to be key to how we move forward as a family. So I'm excited. We've been doing the same thing for 6 episodes in a row, bringing in incredible guests every single week. We've had your pops. We've had my wife. We've had a lot of different people. And today...
my friend, Jamaica, I feel like you guys all got someone.
You didn't get someone?
Yeah. That's okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
I'll be your someone.
Hey, and today we have my friend, Nelson Luna.
Nelson Luna, make some noise.
Thanks for coming on the conversation,
Thanks
my
for
friend.
having me.
I'm so glad.
Really, when you invited me, it was like out of our personal deep relationship. It was really special.
So I feel
So
cool.
Nelson is if you don't know who Nelson is a pastor on our team. He's our executive pastor. So he's the one who does all the work. While I preach. Basically, that's his job, is to, sometimes he wakes me up at 11 a.m. in the morning with a question, and I got to answer it so he can do his job. Waking up at 11. Sometimes I'm like 1 p.m. and he calls me and I'm still asleep, long night out. And he wakes me up so he can do his job.
So rude.
Sorry to interrupt.
So rude.
But Nelson is amazing.
Thank you.
You might know his wife better. She's been leading worship, Amy Luna, leading worship in our church for years. But so much wisdom and so much, just such a great leadership gift on his life. So I'm really excited that we get to talk to him about this particular parable today, which is the parable of the persistent widow. The parable of the persistent widow. That's already preaching.
It's already done.
But persistent widow is not like I'm trying to get remarried. Like she's actually, it's a prayer thing. So it's not like that. I know what you're talking about.
I thought
That's
she was
the issue.
I thought she was on the hunt. I thought she was trying to.
No, this is not dating.
She's not about a cougar.
She's not on Tinder.
No, it's not about Bumble.
No sugar daddy, no sugar
No,
Match.com.
none of that. She's persistent in prayer. So, as is our custom, we do things once or twice and call it a custom.
Yeah. Tradition.
As is our tradition, Nelson, would you do us the honor of reading the passage of scripture we will be having a conversation about?
It'd be my pleasure.
Tonight.
Thank you. The parable of the persistent widow. One day, Jesus told his disciples a story to show that they should always pray and never give up. There was a judge in a certain city, he said, who neither feared God nor cared about people. A widow of that city came to him repeatedly saying, "Give me justice." Do we do voices? Should I do her voice?
Honestly, you make it your own.
Just make it.
As
You can-
my friend, I give you permission to do whatever you want.
Yeah, you used to.
She said, "Give me justice in this dispute with my enemy." The judge ignored her for a while, but finally he said to himself, "I don't fear God or care about people, but this woman is driving me crazy. I'm going to see that she gets justice because she is wearing me out with her constant requests." Then the Lord said, "Learn a lesson from this unjust judge. Even he rendered a just decision in the end, so don't you think God will surely give justice to his chosen people who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will grant justice to them quickly. But when the Son of Man returns, how many will he find on earth who have faith?"
Great job.
What a parable, and you did a great job reading that. My favorite part of this verse so far is who would announce that they don't fear God and care about people.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't fear God and I don't care about people.
I don't care about
But you're driving me crazy. It's just an interesting thing. I think this parable is really important for the time that we're in. This might be the parable of 2020 because we are filming this in advance. So when you're watching this, there has been an election the day before. Yesterday was our election, so we don't know who's going to win because it is September.
It's like we're visiting the future.
But
time travel.
But I do think we didn't realize that we had picked this passage of scripture to be shown on the day after the election. And I think it's important because this is literally talking about a leader whose job would be to care about people, and they don't. And so sometimes, no matter who you're voting for, you think, if I don't get this right person, then I'm not going to get. And he says, no, actually, this woman was persistent in prayer, and she didn't quit, and she ended up getting what God had for her, regardless of who was in that position of power. And I think when I read the Bible, I think that I see God's greatest leaders, God's greatest disciples, his greatest followers be chosen and raised up during times where someone was in power that wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah, wow.
You know,
That's
even
so
when you
true.
look at David in the Bible, David, there's no prophets in David's story until David cheats on his wife with Bathsheba, kills somebody, knocks up the dude's wife, and all of a sudden a prophet named Nathan shows up out of nowhere in response to poor leadership.
Wow.
And so God has raised up Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. So I think this obsession that we have with
Right,
worldly
wow.
leaders begins way back in the Bible when God's people asked for a king
great.
because they wanted to be led by a human instead of God. And I think that the parable in itself talks about being persistent. And if you want to be a multi-billionaire, invent something that people don't have to be persistent.
Right.
Like everything's on demand.
Yeah.
Like everything's on demand. Like you don't have to, when I was a kid, we used to sit and watch and we had to wait till Friday night for our favorite TV show to come on. Now I just happen to be binge watching Cobra Kai.
Nice.
It's
That's
the
on
new
brand.
YouTube. It's like first season 1, and I watched 6 episodes straight.
love
Didn't
that
have to
for
wait
you.
for any of them. Don't have to be
great.
persistent. Don't have to be patient. And so I think this is a thing about what happens when people persistently
Yeah.
pray.
Wow.
Have you seen an experience? We'll start with our amazing guest. You know, why do you think it's so challenging, especially for believers, to pray during hard times? There seems to be a rise of like complaining or even sharing opinions. Nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that. But I don't see in this past couple of months a true call to prayer in my friendship circles.
Right.
You know, what do you think that is, and what do you think that attributes to?
Well, I think one thing, you know, putting in context, the widow in this story would have expected the judge to work on her behalf.
Right.
She would have expected, so she would have been showing up to this judge because kind of the culture of that time, you know, I learned from you to kind of explore the context of it, right? The culture of that time, the judge would have been taught to seek justice for the orphan and the widow. And so she would have been going expecting
Right.
a good outcome, that he would seek justice in her dispute with an enemy.
Right.
And so I think some of it, when I think about like what makes it hard to persist, is those expectations that we have, like that she might be showing up, or we might be showing up feeling entitled to justice the way we define it, and with that, then we figure like, okay, in that equation, I'm going to show up and just get this. Like you said, I'm going to show up and just be able to binge all of the episodes of this. Wait, I have to wait? Wait, that's different than what I expected. And so I think that's actually a really important thing that I take away from this as well, of where am I going somewhere with an expectation and not bringing with that my patience or my willingness to persist through a challenge if I face it.
It's great.
Sure.
Really
Man,
good.
I think that is so powerful.
Yeah.
And even in we don't know what her enemy was trying to do. But also based off that time, it was very likely that her enemy was trying to come and take what her husband had left her.
Wow.
So in those times when a widow's husband would die, life expectancy was real short. People like died by 25 or whatever. So they would come and another person would come and try to take her land
That's so interesting.
that her father had given her or her husband had left her.
Right.
And so it was about losing something. You know,
she'd already lost something.
she had already lost something,
Yeah.
So,
and
like,
now she's losing
Yeah.
something
More,
else.
right.
Wow.
And she could be persistent even after she experienced a bad hand of the cards, if you will. Is that the saying?
Yeah, kind
Sure.
of.
It is now.
that works.
It's tradition. We always say that.
Like you
she'd
always
already,
say.
like I always say, she'd already experienced trauma.
Yeah.
Like her
Right.
husband had died, and I think this year has been full of trauma. 2020 has been horrible in so many ways, and yes, there has been silver linings, and yes, there's been beautiful moments in that too. But I get it. Like I think that when you've been through something, to actually then have to fight for land, to fight for what you have left,
Right.
like I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that she'd already been through a heartbreak, and now she's like, this is all I've got left. I think for me, I don't even know if I'd have the fight left to persist, if I'm being honest. Like I think that I want to believe that I would, But if this had happened to me and then it felt like the world was against me as well, I think maybe Jesus is saying here, hey, like, I'm not diminishing what this woman had lost. I'm actually applauding the fact that she still had a fight in her to say, hey, whatever I've got left, I'm not giving up. And this year has had a lot of moments for all of us where it's just like, I'm over it. I give up. And that was a challenge for me that I got from it of like, can I keep fighting even if it looks like I'm being ignored?
Man, you know, Kendall, the other day when we were working out,
Every time.
see how I slipped that in?
Every single time.
See how I slipped that in?
Yeah.
I love that though. That's great.
Listen, the other day
What's going
when
on?
we were working out, Kendall, you weren't there, actually.
When you died.
I had to be carried in the house. It was really embarrassing, but I was
For real?
persistent. Yeah, it was bad. I had a little episode.
Can we stop there and talk about it? Or okay,
no.
cool.
It was
Let's keep
bad.
going.
But prior to that, we were working out, and we were talking about how where we work out, there's a place where there's a view. And I'm a former youth pastor, and being a youth pastor, when you were trying to reach youth, if you wanted to have your lowest attended night ever, have a prayer gathering.
Right.
Right? Just say, hey, we're gonna pray. We're gonna be persistent in prayer. I'll see you Friday night. If it was like movie
So
night
true.
or free corn dogs or whatever it is, it would be packed. And so one of the things I noticed in our conversation, I was actually surprised where you said there was this spot that you go to like meditate and pray. And I was like, dude, who is this guy? Obviously you're 17 years old, but that was something that even in my faith, I don't know that I always go to prayer first. I don't always know that I'm persistent.
Right.
Like when something goes wrong, or I'll pray, but I don't know that I always set this time aside to be persistent in that way. Like, where did that habit come from for you?
Definitely my dad sparked it. And then it was
Pops
something.
is no
Yeah,
joke.
facts. So I have two things that I normally do. I have a journal. So I write things down at the end of the day. And then also I'll go to meditate. And so there's a spot near my house that's like has an amazing view. And I always pretty much like the majority of the days I actually go up there and there's a couch there that one of the neighbors has, and I talked to the neighbor and he let me use it. And so we put it out there and it's like amazing.
It's so cool.
It's such a dope view, but it's so for me, after the problem occurs, I wait for the problem to like boil down and then I go to God after and like kind of have a conclusion moment, if you will. Like something might happen earlier in the day, then I let it all happen. I solve the problem or whatever it is, and then I go at the end and write it down and like really think about it. Because I think in the thinking about it, A, I learn from my mistakes or what happened.
That's great.
And then B, I can think about what's gonna happen next. What do I do next? What if this happens tomorrow? Like, that's what I do. So for me, it's just like I have my journal and I have this spot and I go meditate and like, that's me. Like, that's how I get through a majority of my problems.
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that is that there's this scripture in Philippians 4 that says, be anxious for nothing, pray about everything.
Right.
And typically when you're anxious about everything, you're praying about nothing.
So
you can
true.
flip that verse, but it says with both prayer and petition.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we understand like what prayer actually means.
so
In the
good.
original Greek word, it doesn't mean to ask God for stuff. Prayer simply means to exchange wishes.
Right.
So you go into the presence of God
gotta go. I
with
gotta pause
something
out.
different. So if you're supposed to ask God, hey God, bless this, bless that, do all that stuff. We're supposed to do that.
Yeah.
The Bible says if it's God of our Father, if an earthly father would give their kid great gifts, how much more will God?
Yeah.
So we're supposed to ask God for things. But the definition of prayer is that you go into the presence of God with a different perspective than you came. You come out with a different
Right.
perspective than you
Than
went
you
in
came
with,
in. Yeah.
or you come out with a different desire than you went with. So you should
so
actually
good.
come out of a
Sheesh.
prayer time with a prayer request that was different than what you had. So in all of that, we can say, hey, be persistent in prayer. Make sure you keep praying. But this parable of the persistent widow, in verse 6, it says, then the Lord said, learn a lesson from this unjust judge. So even when we look at this, it's our human nature to begin to discuss the good person
Yeah,
and what we
so
can learn
true.
from her.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think this whole parable was a bit of a setup
Yeah.
because he was naming a good person and a bad person.
Always go to the good person.
And this is the day
Yeah.
after the election.
Yeah.
And you might have a good person and a bad person.
Yeah.
And he's telling a parable, and we all lean towards, all right, little poor, little persistent widow. What can we learn from her? Let's be persistent in prayer, which obviously that has its place.
Right.
But that's not what Jesus said. He said, let's learn a lesson from this unjust judge.
Right.
Let's take a look at the unjust judge. So therefore, that would mean that there's something that we can learn
Yeah.
from people we deem to be unjust and
Right.
unfair. And the lesson he wanted us to learn is that even he rendered a just decision in the end. And so I want to talk about the middle a little bit. You know, one of the things that God says is he's the beginning and the end, and the middle is so confusing.
It's
Right.
so
Right?
confusing, dude.
Nelson, give us a story, if you can, or what comes to mind when I say, what is something in your life over the years where in the middle, you know, I know you had like different challenges with your ankle and, you know, you got injured in a car accident. Or it wasn't a car accident, you got hit by a car, right? So it's like, that's not an accident, it's not a car accident. You weren't in a car.
Yeah.
No.
But like, what are some things in your life that in the middle, it looks so bad,
Yeah.
but the right decision happened in the end?
Well, I mean, I think there was a turning point in that journey where, you know, I kind of had, you know, that what I said about expectations at the beginning really was formed from that journey. You know, I really felt like the world owed me stuff because I lived in pain.
Oh, shoot.
And had a turning point.
Say that again.
Wait,
Like, you just gonna keep going, bro?
wait. The world owed me stuff because I lived in pain.
Yeah,
Oh
I mean,
my goodness.
there's an entitlement that can come from pain,
For
and,
sure.
and I think we all experience it. I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that's really important is no matter what God taught me in that moment was like no matter what your trauma is, no matter what your
Wow.
pain is, you know, the entitlement that can come from that is real, but then also to add into that perspective, you know. And so what God taught me was like my worst pain might be different or like better or worse, but like comparison. There's actually Dave Chappelle has like a really
it.
interesting stand-up moment where a woman came up and he kind of ended up having an issue with the way that she was trying to compare her suffering to his suffering. And he said, hey, let's not do that. I suffer, you suffer.
Yeah.
Let's just acknowledge that we both
Very
suffer
good.
and not try to figure out
Very good.
whose
Yes.
suffering is
The most.
better or worse.
Yep.
Right.
And that was really the turning point for me in the middle of really understanding the perspective. And I mean, it's really interesting too that you talk about shifting our perspective from the widow to the judge, you know? And so I think that's part of what God shifted. And he shifted me from the victim, seeking what I felt like I was owed because I had been through,
Right.
to really more empathy. Because I think about, you know, the judge that's being unjust, that says, I don't fear God or care about people. What must he have been through to get to
Yeah,
that
facts,
point?
yeah.
You know, like you said, we go to the widow, oh, we got to save her.
Wow.
But like, what about the judge?
Why doesn't he?
How hard would it be to get to the point where you would say and
Publicly,
be known for,
vocally.
I don't fear God or care about people.
Right.
Right.
And maybe how lonely that might be.
Wow.
You know, and so even that, to your point of shifting the perspective there, what it really was for me was a lesson in empathy. What can I learn about other people? Because really that was what was crying in my heart. What I felt owed wasn't, you know, freedom from the pain or somebody commiserating it, but I just wanted somebody to say, hey, I see you, I understand you,
Right.
and like I'm with you.
Yeah, and that's the fight in our nation for equality, is for people to get what they're owed. And this election was a lot about equality and people feeling like they get either A, what they're owed, or B, what someone else has. And I think equality is a very important social construct, but you don't see it often in the kingdom.
Right.
You don't see equality, God championing equality a lot in the kingdom. It's a social construct. What he champions is exaltation and humbling. So whenever you had someone in the Bible who was being oppressed, let's say it was the Egyptians.
Wow.
The Egyptians are up here, the Israelites are down here. God never brought them at the level playing field of the Egyptians. What he did is if they humbled themselves and they were obedient to God, he exalted them to the place
Come on.
that the Egyptians were trying to protect, and he lowered the Egyptians to the place they were trying to keep the Israelites.
Wow.
So the
Jeez.
kingdom construct is exaltation. Because here's the thing, it's not equal. It is exaltation. The Bible says those who humble themselves will be exalted.
Right,
And so even if you are dealing with an unjust judge, the key is that the widow was humble and she persisted herself in prayer and ended up getting what she was supposed to get, even though the judge didn't like people. Right. And I think that's just this lesson that I've been thinking, okay, I believe in equality because I believe that it is a social construct, but I also believe in exaltation, which means that if I humble myself and I continue to pray, I've seen God put me in the position that people were trying to keep me out of, and we weren't equal.
Yeah.
And then I had to serve them.
Right.
Joseph got exalted higher than
That's
his
what I was
brothers
thinking,
and had to serve them.
Yeah.
Shoot.
And so I think what I've been preparing myself for in this is, okay, if I stay persistent in prayer in my character, God, one day you're going to put me in a position where I'm going to be staring at the person who tried to keep me out of this position.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to bless them the same way you blessed me. And so I think this is important that we're persistent the right way.
Right.
Like we have to be persistent in prayer, not just persistent in complaining.
What would you
And-
say? Because like I think, and maybe I'll pose this to everyone, but what would you say in the middle when you're persisting in prayer but not getting the answer you're hoping for? Where's the encouragement in this, or where would you encourage people to go? Because that was one of the dark roads I went through of like, man, I keep asking for something and I'm not getting it. And so how would you kind of encourage people not to give up in the middle of those dark
That's such
seasons?
a great question.
I think he tells us too in verse 8, I will tell you, he will grant justice to them quickly, but when the Son of Man returns, how many will he find on the earth who have faith? Faith comes from hearing the word. So you're living off what God said instead of living off of what he's done.
Wow.
Right.
So that's why Jesus said, man does not live off of bread alone. Bread is provision. Bread is what you need. But every word that comes from, so you're living off of what God said, not off what he does. And that is the hardest thing to do as a believer. I live off what he told me, not what he did for me. Because that living off what he tells me, God will say, come to me and I'll tell you everything you do not know. He said, I'll tell you everything. So then what God said helps sustain you in the gap between what he said and what he did.
Wow.
You're living in the gap. It's like the hardest thing for a visionary is to live in the gap between what they see and where they're at today. And that's the space where you want to give up. That's the space. So that's what I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's living by faith, which means living by what God said, not just by what he does. Because I have things I'm waiting for God to do now. I'm 43. He's just done a lot. I have very few answered prayers, by the way. Right?
Which is hilarious because people would look at you.
But that's
and think
exactly
that,
it. Like,
I would
wouldn't you
say
look
God
and go, wow,
answers-
That's
He's
what I
got
mean.
everything you want.
That's why it's so important to talk to someone that you think has it all together, or that you think, not saying that you don't have it all together, you have a lot together. But if you have a conversation with you, the people that know you know, oh no, like the answered prayers that you think Julian has, they were never prayers he prayed.
Yeah.
They were like,
Yeah.
God, like, hey, here's your life. And he's like, what?
I don't have
Yeah.
an answer. God answers 10% of my prayers, to be honest.
Wow.
But that goes back to what you were talking about at the start of what prayer is, going in and exchanging wishes.
And I think that we should be spending more time praying about what we should be praying about
Wow.
to increase
Yes.
our.
You said to me once.
That took me a second.
Yeah, you said to me once, Elise, before you pray to change, ask God for the desire to change. She's like, start
Yeah.
there. And it took so much pressure off me of like, we think we have to be better, do better, pray more, ask more. And all of us is probably saying that. But if you don't have the desire to do it, just be honest. I think it starts with an honesty of like, I don't want to. I think for me, when it started with the honesty of like, hey, I don't like praying. Praying feels boring to me. And until I realized what prayer was, I thought it was the shopping list. I thought it was I go into the prayer closet or I go into the chair or whatever. I don't have a view. Maybe that would have helped. But and telling God all the things, listing my sins, please forgive me, do this, until I realized that it is a conversation. Well, just like the conversation.
Wow,
See how we segued that?
Tied it
But
back.
I think looking at this, I love what you said about like, for me, when I'm in the middle of things and I can think of a million times when that's like, maybe not a million, that's a lot, that's an exaggeration. But like a few times when I've been in my life in the middle, I'm currently in the middle of a few situations right now that we've talked about on the show before, all that kind of stuff on the, what do we call it? Whatever
Show.
this, the conversation before. I'm like, is it a show? I don't know.
It's a show.
Okay, sorry.
It's a couple of friends talking. We're just
Yes,
it's a series.
we're looking for a
talking.
network. It's all that kind of stuff. But I think when I'm in the middle, for me, the encouragement is coming down to verse 8 again, verse 7 and 8 of knowing, hey, God is not that unjust judge either. Because I think that often I can see God the way I've been treated by people, or the way, honestly, I've treated people. I've been the unjust judge before. I've had people asking me for stuff that I've ignored, honestly. I think until it gets to that point of like, oh, let me just do this for this person or whatever. And I've had people that I felt like the widow with. But I think what Jesus is saying, and the reminder for me is, hey, God isn't like that unjust judge. Like what you said, what he said, he's going to do it. And you've seen it in the past. So...
And I want to loop back real quick because that's a great thought. And I want to make sure that we loop back. Like when I'm saying that God doesn't answer my prayers, you might, well, why pray?
Oh yeah.
Like,
Wow.
well, it's the same thing. Like if I'm a basketball fan and it's so interesting how you start off missing your jump shots and you keep doing it because you become more accurate. And so I continue to
that's
pray
so good.
so I can learn what real prayer looks like.
Right.
And I have found, to Kendall's point, that for me, even when the Bible says, let the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, that I think that people are praying without meditating, right? So meaning that you go into a prayer with the wrong heart, the wrong
mindset.
attitude, so
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
most likely gonna pray the wrong prayer. So the idea is to get your prayer in alignment. That's why basketball players have a shooting coach, because your wrist and your elbow and your footwork needs to be in a certain alignment to make the shot.
So what you're saying is we need prayer coaches.
Yes.
Kendall, will you be my prayer
No,
coach?
because there's nothing wrong with the
That's
ball.
so good.
Nothing wrong with the
There's
word.
nothing wrong with the ball and
Always
nothing
gonna be a
wrong with the
circle.
hoop. God stays the same. The ball doesn't change, the hoop doesn't change. It's your form and the way that you're approaching it that determines if the ball's gonna go in.
Yeah.
And they have people who are in the NBA who still have people coaching the way that they do that.
Still.
So I think I wanted to ask you about your meditation because
Yeah,
I have
that's so
found
good.
more that meditating and praying more of a bullseye prayer, but meditating about what I'm grateful for. You know, the other day, we had a challenge in our marriage. So instead of me just praying about, like, God, could you show my wife this is, I'm like meditating, I'm like, I'm so grateful. And I'm sitting there and I'm mad, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm grateful for my wife, I'm grateful for what we're doing.
You just
and
look like
prayer
Dallas
changed.
just right then.
My prayer changed. So when you meditate,
Right.
what is it for you when you have, is it always asking God for things, or like what does your meditation time look like if specifically if you feel like you don't know what to pray or that prayer is not being answered?
I
that way?
think sometimes for me, like sitting in silence is like for me, it's like so amazing. Like sitting in silence with God and just letting Him do His work. You know what I mean? So like for me, even if I'm coming into a meditation or a prayer, feeling a certain type of way, I think the first thing I need to do is neutralize that. So coming in as just like
Right.
a serene, like on a stable ground, on a stable surface, being neutral with yourself, not having really any emotions tied to it. So that's the first thing. That's why the lookout point really helps me, is because looking out kind of calms my nerves, kind of calms my emotions, so that I can come into that neutral ground. But the second thing for me is, when you're talking about asking, I think I don't always ask, but when I let God do things, He kind of like makes me ask myself questions. I don't know what it is, but like I almost have a conversation with myself and God at the same time.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's a weird thing, but sometimes I answer my own questions. Sometimes God like puts in a totally different thing than I was even talking about. Sometimes he put something in my heart or my mind that's gonna happen sometime later, or like prophecy or something like that. Like it's so, but I think what the biggest thing for me is finding like a neutral ground. Cause like you said, you were coming in there angry. I always come in there neutral. I always come in there waiting for God to speak for me, not asking for something. That makes sense.
Have you ever come into there angry or sad
sure.
or whatever? So then how do you find that neutral ground? Is that just like the looking out at
Yeah, that's the looking
lookout
out.
just taking some time?
That's the just like the appreciation for me
That's
even
great.
being alive.
That gratitude again.
But he's also committed to not feeling that way.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think so many times we're committed to our emotions and we're not
that's
going to get
really
out of
good.
them. He's committed to
No
not
matter how
feeling
it comes
angry.
in.
No, it's
Yeah.
super profound. You know what you talked about. There's almost like kind of setting down your emotions, but then there's that middle moment
Right.
of just giving space to do what
Yeah.
what Julian said God would do, which is
Yeah.
exchange. The picture that came to mind. I used to work in retail, and we'd have some customers come in and they'd be angry, like, you gotta do this return. I'm 31 days out from and it's like I would be fully prepared to do what they're asking, and it would go faster if they would like lay their emotions down and get silent quicker.
Right.
Right.
Like there's that moment where it's like, okay, let me actually process the exchange you're asking me to do. That it sounds like you figured out a way to expedite that process.
Man,
That's really good.
dude, that is no joke. I think in closing, I think that at the end of the day, this is about faith.
Wow.
And every prayer that you pray with faith will be answered. And I want to encourage you that even the Greek word faith means pistis, which is where we get our English word piston, the things that drive an engine. So what's driving you has to be faith. And faith is a powerful, powerful word. It's not vibes, it's not energy, it's not positive thinking. What faith is, in the original context, is to be divinely persuaded. So by default, sometimes I think that my prayer life isn't as strong as it could be, and God's not answering those prayers in the way that I would like Him to because I'm doing I'm the one talking, right? So a lot of times our prayer life is to humanly persuade God to do something. But faith is to be divinely persuaded, which means that it is God in His divinity persuading you what to believe. And that is the difference. So when you go in the presence of God and you're praying and God talks you into something. Now, if you have to be divinely persuaded, that means you start that prayer not wanting to do or not wanting to believe whatever God's about to tell you to believe or do. And so in your time of prayer, you come out saying, oh, this is what you want me to do. And that type of faith, living by that, is what Christ is looking for when He returns. And I think that is powerful. I don't think that God, He's not looking for preachers. He's not looking for, it might involve them, but He's looking for people with faith. People, you're doing something that I had to talk you into doing. And I think that if we are going to pray correctly, if we're going to be persistent correctly, there's got to be time in our meditation, our time with God, where God can speak to us, right? And tell us to do something that we didn't originally want to do. How am I living by faith? It's not how positive I am or how do I believe. What in 2020 has God had to talk you into doing that you didn't want to do? What has He had to, honestly, like for all the single people, if you get married by faith, it would mean that God in some way had to talk you into who you want to marry. You didn't just get to choose them and have a connection and a chemistry. That stuff has its place. But sometimes God had to speak to you and talk to you and say, hey, that's the person I'm calling you to be with. Sometimes God has to talk you into taking a job. Sometimes God has to talk you into leaving one. And I think there should be times throughout every season where there's been something major that God has had to talk us into. And maybe this season is just no matter who's in office, God has to talk us into keep praying and keep being persistent. And I believe if we do that, then Jesus will be with us in all that we do. And so I'm going to leave you guys with that. Man, season 2 has been awesome. Can y'all give it up for my co-host, Elise Murphy, Brother Kendall Haley, and our final guest, we saved the best for last, Brother Nelson Luna. We will see you for season 3.
Wow.
I just got a text while we were filming this.
Such a
We got picked up by YouTube Red.
YouTube Red,
YouTube
okay.
Red.
We might be YouTube Orange. We're gonna be their like
Yeah.
substation.
We haven't been picked up by anybody. I just keep saying that at the end of every season.
Speak
I'm
that
just
out. You be
believing.
persistent.
Listen,
Hello.
the
I
side
might need to
hustle.
meditate about that. Get
This
to
will
the
be
couch
my
with
show.
Kendall.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to Couch with Kendall this weekend and
Couch
believe.
with Kendall. You should do that.
Yo,
That'd be
yo,
fun.
We should
That's a
film an
show.
episode from the
We
couch.
love
That
that.
actually be dope.
Dude, that would be fire.
Couch with Kendall.
You're welcome.
Season 3, Couch with Kendall.
The couch with Kendall.
Love you guys so much. If you haven't had a chance to watch all the other episodes, please catch up. We
Yeah.
believe you're gonna get some great wisdom and things that'll inspire your faith. We love you so much, and we will see you soon for season 3 of
The Conversation.
Yes!
Nailed it.
Bye.